Victoria Ashford stood in her penthouse living room, staring at her phone like it had personally betrayed her. The screen showed a text message from her pianist. Food poisoning. Can't make it tonight. So sorry. She wanted to throw the phone across the room. In 3 hours, 12 of Manhattan's most influential people would walk through her door for an intimate dinner party. Everything had to be perfect. The food, the wine, the ambiance. And ambiance meant live piano music floating through the air, while her guests sipped champagne and talked about their latest business deals. Victoria had built her tech empire on attention to detail. She didn't accept excuses, and she definitely didn't accept last-minute cancellations. But here she was, with no backup plan and no time to find one. She walked over to the grand piano sitting near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Steinway had cost her more than most people made in a year. It was gorgeous, black and gleaming, perfectly positioned to catch the city lights. She ran her hand across the polished surface. Not a speck of dust. Rosa made sure of that. Rosa, her housekeeper, the woman who'd been cleaning this penthouse for 15 years now? Victoria tried to remember but couldn't pin down the exact number. Time blurred when you were busy changing the world. She heard the familiar sound of the vacuum cleaner shut off in the other room. Rosa was finishing up her evening duties before heading home. Victoria checked her watch. Rosa usually left by 7, which meant her son would be here soon to walk her home. That's when the idea hit her. The boy. Rosa's son. What was his name? Diego? Daniel? Something with a D. Victoria had seen him hundreds of times over the years, sitting quietly in the service entrance, doing homework while waiting for his mother. He must be 17 or 18 by now. She vaguely remembered Rosa mentioning something about him playing piano at some community center. It wasn't ideal, not even close, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Victoria walked into the kitchen where Rosa was wiping down the counters. The older woman looked up with a warm smile, the kind of smile that made Victoria slightly uncomfortable because it was so genuine. Rosa, your son. He plays piano, doesn't he? Rosa's smile grew wider. Daniel, yes, ma'am. He loves music. Plays every chance he gets. Perfect. My pianist canceled. I need someone to play background music tonight during dinner. Nothing complicated. Just some pleasant sounds while people eat. Can he do that? Rosa's expression shifted, uncertainty creeping in. Tonight? But Miss Victoria, he just works at the warehouse after school. He's never played for anything like this. I'll pay him $100, cash, for maybe 2 hours of work. Victoria pulled out her phone, already moving to the next problem on her list. Just tell him to wear something nice. Well, as nice as possible. A dark shirt at least. He needs to blend in. Rosa hesitated, then nodded slowly. Let me call him. He should be here any minute. 20 minutes later, Daniel Santos stood in the service entrance of the penthouse, looking at his mother with questions in his eyes. He'd rushed over from his shift at the warehouse, still wearing his work clothes. Confused about why his mom needed him urgently. Victoria barely glanced at him as she swept past, her heels clicking on the marble floor. You must be Daniel. Your mother says you play piano. I need background music for a dinner party. Nothing fancy. Can you handle that? Daniel looked at his mother, then back at Victoria. Yes, ma'am. I can play. Good, Rosa, find him something better to wear. Maybe one of the blazers from the coat closet. Something dark. Victoria was already walking away, her phone pressed to her ear. And Daniel, remember your background. Soft, pleasant, forgettable. Don't try to show off. Nobody wants to hear a concert. They want to talk. Daniel nodded, even though Victoria wasn't looking at him anymore. Rosa led her son to a storage closet where Victoria kept extra coats for guests. She found a navy blazer that was slightly too big for Daniel's lean frame, but it would work. As he slipped it on, Rosa adjusted the collar, her hands gentle but worried. Mijo, are you okay with this? You don't have to if you don't want to. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. It's fine, Ma. $100 is $100. That's almost a week of work at the warehouse. Just play simple, like she said. Don't make her angry. I won't, I promise. But as Daniel sat down at the Steinway piano 30 minutes later, his fingers touching keys that probably cost more than everything his family owned, he felt something shift inside his chest. He'd played on beat-up keyboards on the ancient piano at the community center with its sticky keys and off-tune notes. But this instrument was different. When he pressed down on middle C, the sound that emerged was pure and rich, filling the enormous room with warmth. He ran through a few scales quietly, testing the action, feeling how responsive the keys were. This piano had barely been played. He could tell by how perfectly it was maintained, how even the tone was across all the octaves. It was a crime, really, to have an instrument this beautiful and leave it silent. The guests began arriving around 7:30. Daniel watched them filter in through the corner of his eye, keeping his head down, his fingers moving through simple classical pieces. Vivaldi, Mozart. Things everyone had heard 1,000 times in elevators and hotel lobbies. The guests were exactly what he expected. Expensive suits, designer dresses, voices that carried the confidence of people who'd never worried about making rent. They held wine glasses and laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny. Nobody looked at him. He might as well have been furniture. Victoria glided through the room, the perfect host, making sure everyone had what they needed. She pointed out the view, the artwork on the walls, the story behind some sculpture she'd acquired at an auction. Daniel noticed she never once glanced at the piano. As dinner was served at the long dining table, Daniel continued playing. His back was starting to ache from sitting in one position, and his fingers were getting tired, but he kept going, maintaining that invisible presence Victoria had demanded. Then something happened. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the frustration of playing so far beneath his ability, but Daniel's fingers started to wander. Without meaning to, he began improvising, weaving in small variations to the classical pieces. A jazz riff here, a harmonic shift there. Nothing too dramatic, but enough to make the music more interesting, more alive. He added a bit of Chopin, then shifted into something he'd been working on himself, a melody that had been stuck in his head for weeks. His fingers moved faster, finding confidence, telling a story in the keys. That's when he noticed the conversations getting quieter. Daniel's heart started to race, but his hands kept moving. The music was pulling something out of him. All the hours he'd spent teaching himself, all the dreams he'd carefully packed away because they seemed impossible. It poured out through his fingers into this beautiful instrument that finally, for the first time, was being played the way it deserved. He closed his eyes, lost in the sound, in the feeling of creating something real. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice cut through like a knife. Daniel's hands froze on the keys. He opened his eyes to find her standing beside the piano, her expression tight with annoyance. "Could you keep it simpler? You're supposed to be background music. This is too much. Just play quietly, please." Every eye in the room was on him. Daniel felt his face grow hot. He nodded once, not trusting his voice, and placed his hands back on the keys. Simple scales. Basic melodies. Background noise. He was invisible again, exactly as ordered. Daniel kept his head down and played the simplest melodies he knew. His fingers felt heavy now, like they were betraying him with every basic note. The piano beneath his hands was capable of so much more, but he'd been put in his place. Background music, nothing more. The dinner conversation picked up again. Victoria's guests returned to their discussions about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Crystal clinked against crystal. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, and Daniel became invisible once more. But someone was still watching him. At the far end of the table sat an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes. His name was Bernard Castellano, and unlike the others, he hadn't completely returned to his conversation. Every few minutes, his gaze drifted back to the piano, studying the young man sitting there in an ill-fitting, borrowed blazer. Bernard had spent 40 years in the music world. He'd conducted orchestras in Vienna, taught at conservatories, discovered talent in the most unexpected places. And what he'd heard in those brief moments before Victoria shut it down had made every nerve in his body wake up. That wasn't just some kid playing piano. That was something else entirely. The dinner dragged on. Course after course appeared, each one more elaborate than the last. Daniel's stomach growled quietly. He hadn't eaten since lunch, a quick sandwich between his morning classes and his afternoon shift at the warehouse. The smell of the food was torture, but he kept his eyes on the keys and his mind on the music. Simple, safe, forgettable. Around 9 o'clock, Victoria stood and guided her guests toward the balcony. The autumn air had turned crisp, and the city lights sparkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Someone suggested brandy, and Victoria was already moving toward her private collection, eager to show off another piece of her carefully curated life. As the group migrated outside, Bernard hung back. He waited until Victoria's attention was fully occupied, then walked quietly toward the piano. Daniel noticed the movement and tensed. Another complaint? Another reminder to keep it simple? How long have you been playing? Bernard asked. His voice was different from the others, curious instead of commanding. Daniel's hands stilled on the keys. Since I was 7, sir. Where did you study? This was always the awkward question. Daniel felt his cheeks warm. I didn't study anywhere formal. Just taught myself. YouTube videos mostly. And there's an old piano at the community center near my building. They let me practice there when nobody else is using the room. Bernard's eyebrows rose. You taught yourself? Yes, sir. And books from the library. I borrowed every piano book they had. Probably read some of them 5 or 6 times. That improvisation earlier. Before Victoria asked you to stop. That was yours? Daniel nodded, unsure if he was in trouble again. I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Bernard's voice was firm. That was extraordinary. How did you learn to improvise like that? I don't know. It just happens sometimes. I hear music in my head and my fingers find it on the keys. I've been doing it for years. Making up songs, mixing different styles together, seeing what sounds good. Bernard pulled out his phone. Would you play something for me? Just one piece. Whatever you want. Don't hold back this time. Daniel glanced toward the balcony where Victoria's silhouette was visible through the glass, her hands gesturing as she told some story to her captive audience. His mother was in the kitchen, probably cleaning up the dinner dishes, staying late to finish the job. I don't think Miss Victoria would want me to. I'm asking you to play. Bernard interrupted gently. Not her. Me. Just for a moment, please. There was something in the older man's face that Daniel trusted. A kindness, maybe, or recognition. The look someone gives you when they actually see you instead of looking through you. Daniel took a breath and let his hands settle on the keys. This time, he didn't hold anything back. He started with a classical piece, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but then he shifted it, adding jazz harmonies that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. His fingers moved faster, finding rhythms that came from deep inside him, from all the nights he'd stayed up late composing in his head, because he couldn't afford to waste electricity on the broken keyboard in their apartment. He played about his mother's tired face after double shifts, about his father who'd left when Daniel was 5, promising to send money that never came, about the warehouse where he stacked boxes for $9 an hour, dreaming of concert halls, about the scholarship applications he couldn't submit because he had no formal training, no recorded performances, no way to prove what he could do. The music poured out raw and real. His calloused fingers, roughened from manual labor, flew across the keys with a precision that years of physical work had somehow strengthened rather than damaged. Each note was perfect. Each transition was seamless. He was telling his whole story without saying a single word. When he finished, his hands were shaking. Bernard was staring at him with an expression Daniel couldn't read. Then the older man did something unexpected. He lifted his phone. Would you do that again? I want to record it. Why? Because people need to hear this. Trust me. Daniel played again, even better this time because he knew someone was actually listening. The music filled every corner of the enormous penthouse, spilling out through the open balcony door into the night air. That's when Victoria noticed. She stepped back inside, her face shifting from confusion to irritation. The background music had stopped being background, and her carefully controlled evening was suddenly off script. What's going on here? She walked toward the piano, her heels clicking sharply. I specifically asked you to keep it simple. Bernard turned to face her, and there was something in his posture that made even Victoria pause. Do you have any idea what you're listening to? I'm listening to my dinner entertainment getting carried away. Victoria. Bernard's voice was quiet but intense. I've spent my entire life around music. I've heard thousands of pianists, from students to masters. What this young man just played. Do you understand how rare this is? Victoria crossed her arms. He's Rosa's son. I hired him to play background music for $100. That's the arrangement. That's not the point. Then what is the point, Bernard? The point is you have a prodigy sitting at your piano and you're treating him like a piece of furniture. The words hung in the air. Daniel wanted to disappear. He could see his mother standing in the kitchen doorway now, her eyes wide with worry. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, making waves, drawing attention, getting on Victoria's bad side. Victoria's jaw tightened. Bernard, you're being dramatic. He plays nicely, I'll grant you that. But let's not get carried away. I'm not getting carried away. I know what I heard. Bernard pulled a business card from his wallet and held it out to Daniel. This has my email and phone number. I want you to contact me. We need to talk about your future. Daniel took the card with trembling fingers. It was heavy stock, expensive, with raised lettering that read, Bernard Castellano, music consultant and philanthropic advisor. Victoria watched the exchange with barely concealed annoyance. She checked her watch pointedly. I think we're done for the evening. Rosa, you can finish up the kitchen tomorrow. Daniel, thank you for your time. She pulled a clip of bills from somewhere and counted out 520s, placing them on top of the piano without looking at him. The message was clear. Transaction complete. Time to go. Daniel stood, his legs stiff from sitting so long. He picked up the money and clutched Bernard's card in his other hand. His mother appeared at his side, already gathering their things. Thank you. Miss Victoria, Rosa said quietly. Victoria had already turned away, returning to her guests on the balcony. Bernard caught Daniel's eye one more time before he left. The older man nodded, a silent promise. Call me. As Daniel and Rosa rode the subway home to Queens, Daniel stared at the business card. The train rocked and swayed, and around them, tired workers dozed and teenagers laughed, and life moved forward like it always did. What do you think? Daniel asked his mother. Rosa looked at the card, then at her son's face. She saw the hope there, fragile and dangerous. I think maybe someone finally heard you. Micho. Daniel held the card tighter and allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe his life was about to change. Daniel kept Bernard's business card in his wallet for 3 days before he had the courage to send an email. Every time he pulled it out, doubt crept in. What if the old man had just been being polite? What if he'd already forgotten about the kid who played piano at some dinner party? But on Wednesday night, after a particularly brutal shift at the warehouse where his supervisor yelled at him for moving too slowly, Daniel sat on the floor of the studio apartment he shared with his mother and typed out a message on his phone. Dear Mr. Castellano, this is Daniel Santos. We met at Miss Victoria's dinner party on Saturday. You asked me to contact you. I'm not sure what you wanted to talk about, but I'm available whenever is convenient for you. Thank you for listening to me play. It meant a lot. Sincerely, Daniel. He read it over 10 times, changing words, adding and deleting sentences before finally hitting send. Then he stared at his phone for 20 minutes as if Bernard might respond instantly. Nothing came. Daniel tried not to think about it. He went to his morning classes at the community college where he was studying general education, hoping to eventually transfer to a 4-year school if he could ever afford it. He worked his afternoon shifts at the warehouse, stacking boxes until his shoulders ached. And 3 nights a week he went to the community center to practice on their beat-up piano. A week passed. No response. Daniel told himself it was fine. He'd been foolish to hope. People like Bernard probably met talented kids all the time. Why would he be special? Rosa noticed her son's disappointment even though he tried to hide it. She'd seen the light in his eyes that night at Victoria's penthouse, and she'd watched it slowly dim with each passing day. Maybe his email is full, she offered one evening as they ate rice and beans at their small kitchen table. Or maybe he's traveling. Maybe he changed his mind, Daniel said quietly. Or maybe good things take time, mijo. But Daniel had stopped checking his email obsessively. He'd stopped carrying his phone in his pocket at work, hoping to feel it buzz with a notification. He was building his walls back up, the ones that protected him from wanting things he couldn't have. What Daniel didn't know was that Bernard hadn't forgotten him at all. The night of Victoria's dinner party, Bernard had gone home and watched the video he'd recorded at least 20 times. Each viewing confirmed what he'd felt in that moment. This wasn't just talent. This was genius hiding in plain sight. He'd sent the video to 3 of his old colleagues. 2 of them were music professors at prestigious conservatories. One was a talent scout who'd discovered some of the most successful classical musicians of the past decade. Within 48 hours, all 3 had called him back. The conversation was always the same. Who is this kid? Where has he been studying? Why haven't we heard of him? Bernard explained the situation. A 17-year-old boy, self-taught, working at a warehouse, playing at a community center on a broken piano. No formal training, no connections, no money. And then Bernard started making calls. He contacted foundations that supported young artists. He reached out to his network of wealthy patrons who loved discovering new talent. He made inquiries at Juilliard, at the Manhattan School of Music, at every institution that might give a kid like Daniel a chance. But bureaucracy moved slowly. Scholarship applications had deadlines. Audition schedules were set months in advance. Everyone wanted to help, but nobody could help quickly. So Bernard did something unconventional. He uploaded the video to YouTube. He titled it simply, "Undiscovered Prodigy Plays at Manhattan Dinner Party." He added a description explaining that this was a self-taught 17-year-old with no formal training, working minimum wage to support his family while teaching himself piano through YouTube videos and library books. Then he sent the link to every music journalist, blogger, and influencer he knew, and he waited. The video got 100 views the first day, 500 the second day. By the end of the first week, it had 10,000 views and people were sharing it across social media platforms. This can't be real. If this kid is self-taught, I'm quitting music. Someone needs to get this boy into a real music school immediately. Comments poured in from professional musicians, teachers, and casual listeners who were moved by what they heard. Some people criticized the quality of the recording, the background noise from Victoria's dinner party, but most people focused on what mattered, the music itself. By week 2, the video had 500,000 views. Music blogs started picking up the story. Who was this mysterious pianist? Why was he playing at a rich person's dinner party? How was it possible that someone this talented had been overlooked? A classical music magazine reached out to Bernard for an interview. He told them everything. About finding Daniel at Victoria's penthouse, about the calloused hands that moved across the keys with impossible precision, about the music that came from somewhere deep and real. The reporter asked if she could interview Daniel too. Bernard realized he hadn't heard back from the boy since giving him his card. He checked his email and found Daniel's message from 10 days earlier, somehow buried in his spam folder. He called Daniel immediately. Daniel was at the warehouse when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer because he didn't recognize the number, but something made him swipe to accept the call. "Daniel, this is Bernard Castellano, from Victoria's dinner party." Daniel's heart stopped. He stepped away from the conveyor belt, moving toward a quieter corner. "Mr. Castellano, yes, sir. I'm sorry I sent you an email, but I wasn't sure if you got it." "I did, and I apologize for the delay in responding. Daniel, I need to ask you something. How would you feel about your story being shared publicly? Your music?" "I don't understand." Bernard explained about the video, about the views and the shares and the growing interest, about music publications wanting to write articles, about the possibilities that were starting to open up. Daniel listened in stunned silence. When Bernard finished, Daniel's voice came out shaky. "500,000 people have watched me play? More than that now. The number keeps growing. Daniel, I think this might be the break you've been waiting for, but I need your permission to keep sharing your story, and I need you to trust me." Daniel looked around the warehouse. Concrete floors, fluorescent lights, the smell of cardboard and diesel fumes. This was his reality. This was what his life looked like. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I trust you." "Good, can you take tomorrow off work? I want you to meet some people." Daniel thought about his supervisor, about the shifts he couldn't afford to miss, about the bills that needed to be paid. But he thought about his mother's words too. "Good things take time. I'll be there." That night, Daniel told his mother everything. She cried, which made him cry, and they held each other in their tiny apartment while the city hummed outside their window. "What if nothing comes from this?" Daniel asked. "What if everything comes from this?" Rosa replied. The next morning, Daniel put on the best clothes he owned. A button-down shirt Rosa had found at a thrift store and pressed carefully with their old iron, and the one pair of dress pants he wore to community college presentations. He took the subway into Manhattan, clutching the address Bernard had texted him. The building was in Lincoln Center, glass and steel and the kind of architecture that made Daniel feel small. Inside the lobby, Bernard was waiting with 2 other people. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a younger man carrying a professional camera. "Daniel," Bernard smiled. "Thank you for coming. This is Patricia Chen. She's a professor at Juilliard. And this is Anthony. A journalist who wants to document your story. Patricia shook his hand firmly. I watched your video, Daniel. I'd like to hear you play in person. Would that be all right? Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. They led him to a practice room with a beautiful grand piano. Not as expensive as Victoria's, but well-maintained and perfectly tuned. Daniel sat down, his hands trembling slightly. Play whatever you'd like, Patricia said. Pretend we're not here. Daniel closed his eyes and let his fingers find the keys. He played the piece he'd been working on in his head for months, the one about hope and fear and the thin line between dreams and impossibility. He poured everything into it. Every doubt, every moment of exhaustion, every time someone had made him feel invisible. When he finished, he opened his eyes. Patricia was wiping tears from her face. Bernard was smiling like a proud father, and Anthony's camera had captured every second. Young man, Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion, we need to talk about your future. And for the first time in his life, Daniel believed he actually had one. The meeting with Patricia lasted 3 hours. She asked Daniel questions about his musical education, his influences, his goals. She had him play different styles, different composers, pieces he'd never seen before. With each test, her expression grew more serious. Your technique needs work, she said finally. Your posture is wrong in places. You've developed some habits that we'd need to correct. But your natural ability, your ear, your emotional intuition. Daniel, I've been teaching for 27 years. What you have can't be taught. She explained that Juilliard's application deadline had passed months ago. The next incoming class was already selected. But there were exceptions sometimes for exceptional circumstances. She couldn't make promises, but she could make calls. In the meantime, Patricia continued, you need to keep practicing. Real practice with structure. I can recommend some teachers who might take you on, but lessons are expensive. Bernard, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. I'll cover the lessons. Consider it an investment. Daniel's throat tightened. I can't let you do that. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do it. There's a difference. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel's life became a careful balancing act. He still worked at the warehouse, still went to his community college classes. But now he also had piano lessons 3 times a week with a teacher Bernard had found, a retired concert pianist who lived in Brooklyn and charged $200 an hour. The lessons were brutal. Mrs. Chen, no relation to Patricia, didn't care about Daniel's feelings. She cared about precision, about technique, about breaking the bad habits he'd spent 10 years developing. Your wrist is too high. Again. You're rushing. Feel the tempo. Again. That fingering is inefficient. Use the 4th finger here, not the 5th. Again. Daniel would leave her apartment exhausted and discouraged, his confidence shaken. Everything he thought he knew suddenly felt wrong. But he kept going back because he understood what she was doing. She was rebuilding his foundation so it could support something greater. The video continued to spread. By the end of the month, it had 2 million views. News outlets picked up the story. Self-taught genius discovered at Billionaire's dinner party. The headlines made it sound more dramatic than it was, but they got people's attention, and eventually, Victoria's attention. She saw the article in a business magazine she read every morning with her coffee. There was Daniel's face, and beneath it, a description of how a Manhattan tech billionaire had hired a housekeeper's son to play background music at a dinner party, never realizing she was hosting one of the generation's most promising young talents. The article didn't mention her by name, but everyone in her circle knew. The story had spread through Manhattan's social scene like wildfire. People were talking. Some thought it was charming. Others thought it revealed something uncomfortable about how easily wealth could overlook talent. Victoria called Rosa. Rosa had stopped working for Victoria 2 weeks earlier. Once Bernard's support made it possible, once Daniel's schedule became too demanding to work around, Rosa had given her notice. She'd found a different cleaning job, one with better hours and better pay. When Victoria's name appeared on her phone screen, Rosa almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. Rosa, it's Victoria. I saw the article about Daniel. Yes, ma'am. I had no idea he was that talented. If I'd known, I would have. Well, things might have been different. Rosa was quiet for a moment. She thought about all the years she'd worked in that penthouse. All the times Victoria had walked past her son without really seeing him. All the times Rosa had mentioned Daniel's music, his dreams. only to have Victoria nod absently and change the subject. "Miss Victoria, with respect, I told you many times about Daniel's playing. You knew he spent every free moment at the piano. You just never asked to hear him. You never asked about his dreams. I'm a busy person, Rosa. I can't be expected to keep track of everyone's children. I only have one child, Miss Victoria, and I worked for you for 15 years. The silence on the other end of the line was long and uncomfortable. "Well," Victoria said finally, her voice tight, "I hope everything works out for him." She hung up without saying goodbye. Rosa stared at her phone, feeling something between sadness and satisfaction. Some people, she realized, would never understand what they'd missed. Meanwhile, Daniel's video reached someone else, someone who actually mattered. The director of the Peterson Foundation for Young Artists was scrolling through social media during his lunch break when the video appeared on his feed. He watched it twice, then immediately called his assistant. "Find out everything you can about this kid. Daniel Santos. I want a full report by the end of the day." The Peterson Foundation had one mission: to identify and support young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. They provided scholarships, mentorship, instruments, whatever was needed to help talented kids who otherwise would never get a chance. 3 days later, Bernard got a call. The foundation wanted to meet Daniel. They were considering offering a full scholarship package. Not just tuition, but living expenses, books, everything he'd need to attend any music school that would accept him. But there was a catch. Daniel would need to audition. Not just play casually like he did at Victoria's dinner party. A real audition, with a prepared program, performing in front of a panel of judges. The audition was scheduled for 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare pieces he'd never performed formally. 6 weeks to polish his technique. 6 weeks to prove he deserved this chance. Mrs. Chen intensified their lessons. 5 days a week now, 2 hours each session. She selected 4 pieces for him to perform. 1 Bach prelude and fugue, 1 Chopin nocturne, 1 contemporary piece, and 1 of his own compositions. "The original composition is crucial," she explained. "It shows who you are as an artist, not just as a performer." Daniel worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He'd wake up at 5 in the morning to practice before his warehouse shift. He'd practice during his lunch break on a portable keyboard he'd bought with some of the money Victoria had paid him. He'd practice late into the night while his mother slept, using headphones so he wouldn't disturb her. His hands developed blisters that turned to calluses on top of the calluses he already had from warehouse work. His back ached from hours at the piano bench. He dreamed in musical notation. 2 weeks before the audition, Daniel had a breakdown. He was practicing the Chopin nocturne for the 100th time, when suddenly his hands just stopped. He stared at the keys and felt nothing but emptiness. "I can't do this," he told his mother that night. "I'm not good enough. These other kids, they've been training their whole lives at fancy schools with professional teachers. I'm just some warehouse worker who learned from YouTube." Rosa sat beside him on their worn couch. She took his hands in hers, feeling the rough skin, the evidence of his double life. "You know what makes you different from those other kids?" she asked. "They've never had to choose between their dreams and eating dinner. They've never practiced on a broken piano because it was the only one they could access. They've never stacked boxes for 9 hours and then come home to practice for 3 more. That doesn't make me better. It just makes me tired. No, mijo. It makes you hungry. And hunger is powerful. Those other kids are talented, yes, but you're talented and desperate. You know what it means to have nothing. So when you play, you're not just making music. You're fighting for your life." Daniel looked at his mother's face, at the lines around her eyes from years of hard work, at the strength in her expression. She'd been fighting her whole life too. For him, for both of them. What if I fail? Then you fail knowing you tried. But Daniel, what if you don't? The night before the audition, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, running through the pieces in his mind, his fingers moving against the blanket like it was a keyboard. At 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep. He sat at their small kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just words on paper, everything he was feeling. "Tomorrow I find out if dreams can come true for people like me. If working at a warehouse and practicing on broken pianos is enough. If being hungry for something is the same as deserving it. I'm terrified, but I'm ready. Whatever happens, I played my heart out. I didn't stay invisible, and maybe that's enough." He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Then he sat in the dark and waited for morning to come. The audition was held at a concert hall in Midtown Manhattan. Daniel arrived an hour early with his mother, both of them dressed in their best clothes. Rosa wore a dress she'd bought specially for the occasion, navy blue and simple. Daniel wore a suit that Bernard had insisted on purchasing for him despite his protests. "You need to look the part," Bernard had said. "Confidence starts with feeling prepared." But as Daniel sat in the waiting area, watching other young pianists warm up, confidence felt like a foreign concept. These kids looked different. They carried themselves differently. Their clothes fit perfectly. Their parents spoke in educated tones about summer programs in Europe and private performances. One girl, maybe 16, was doing finger exercises that looked impossibly complex. A boy near the window was reading sheet music like it was a casual magazine. They all belonged here. Daniel felt like an imposter. Daniel Santos, a woman with a clipboard called his name. This was it. Rosa squeezed his hand. "Remember who you are, mijo. Remember why you play?" Daniel stood, his legs feeling unsteady. He followed the woman down a long corridor to the stage entrance. Through the curtain, he could see the auditorium. It wasn't huge, maybe 300 seats, but most of them were empty. Just the panel of 5 judges sat in the center section, their faces serious and unreadable. Bernard was there too, sitting in the back. When he saw Daniel, he gave a small nod of encouragement. "You'll have 10 minutes, the woman explained. Introduce yourself, then begin with your prepared pieces. The judges may stop you before you finish if they've heard enough. That's normal. Don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged if they stop you." "Great." Daniel walked onto the stage. The piano waiting for him was a Steinway, similar to Victoria's but somehow more intimidating. Stage lights made everything feel surreal and too bright. He sat at the bench and adjusted the height, buying himself a few seconds. His hands were shaking. He pressed them against his thighs, willing them to steady. "Whenever you're ready," a voice called from the judges section. Daniel took a breath. "My name is Daniel Santos. I'm 17 years old and I'll be performing 4 pieces today. I'll start with Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier." His fingers found the opening notes. For the first few measures he was mechanical, thinking too hard about technique. Mrs. Chen's voice echoed in his head. Wrist position, finger placement, tempo. But then something shifted. The music took over. His body remembered what his mind was trying to control. The Bach flowed out, mathematical and beautiful, each voice in the fugue clear and distinct. He'd practiced this piece so many times that his fingers knew it better than he knew his own thoughts. When he finished, there was silence. Daniel couldn't tell if that was good or bad. The judges were writing notes. "Continue," one of them said. The Chopin Nocturne came next. This was the piece that had made him break down 2 weeks ago, the one he'd almost given up on. But now, sitting in this moment, he understood it differently. Chopin had written this music during a time of exile, separated from his homeland, longing for something he couldn't have. Daniel knew about longing. He played it with everything he had. The melody sang out, full of aching beauty. His dynamics ranged from barely audible whispers to passionate declarations. By the final measures, his eyes were wet, but his hands never faltered. A judge in the front row leaned forward. Her expression changed from professional distance to genuine interest. The contemporary piece was shorter, more technical. Daniel executed it cleanly, hitting every complex rhythm, every unusual chord. It was meant to show versatility, and he delivered. Then came his original composition. The piece he'd titled Simply Invisible. He'd written it over the past 6 weeks, incorporating everything he'd learned, but keeping the raw emotion that made his playing unique. It started quietly, tentatively, like someone afraid to be heard. Then it built slowly, gaining confidence, adding layers. The middle section was chaotic, frustrated, full of dissonant chords that resolved into something hopeful. The final section brought back the opening theme, but transformed. Not invisible anymore. Present, seen, real. When the last note faded, Daniel kept his hands on the keys for a moment. Then he stood and faced the judges. They were all writing frantically. One of them, an older man with white hair, was smiling. "Thank you, Daniel," the woman in the center said. "We'll be in touch within 2 weeks with our decision." That was it. 10 minutes that would determine his future, and now it was over. Daniel walked off stage feeling numb. He'd done his best. Whether his best was good enough, he couldn't tell. In the waiting area, Rosa hugged him tight. "You were beautiful, mijo. I'm so proud of you." Bernard joined them, his eyes bright. "That was exceptional, Daniel, truly, now we wait." The next 2 weeks were torture. Daniel returned to his warehouse job, to his community college classes, to his normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. He existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to move forward or go back. The video of his original performance at Victoria's dinner party had now surpassed 5 million views. People commented daily, asking for updates. Where is he now? Did he get into a school? Someone please help this kid. Daniel didn't read the comments anymore. The attention felt overwhelming, and none of it would matter if the foundation said no. On day 13, Bernard called. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock? Did they decide?" "Tomorrow, Daniel. Just be there." Daniel barely slept that night. He kept imagining Bernard's face, trying to read meaning into his tone. Was it good news or bad news delivered gently? The next morning, Daniel took the subway to Bernard's office in a building overlooking Central Park. The receptionist led him to a conference room where Bernard waited with 2 other people. One was Patricia from Juilliard. The other was a man Daniel didn't recognize. "Daniel, please sit." Bernard gestured to a chair. His expression was unreadable. Daniel sat, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Patricia spoke first. "I have some news from Juilliard. After reviewing your audition tape and considering your unique circumstances, the admissions committee has decided to offer you a spot in next year's incoming class. It's highly unusual, but they're making an exception." Daniel's breath caught. Before he could process that information, the other man spoke. "I'm Richard Peterson, director of the Peterson Foundation. Our panel reviewed your audition as well. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship package. Tuition, housing, living expenses, and a stipend for your mother so she can reduce her work hours. The package also includes funding for continued private lessons and a performance stipend." The room spun. Daniel gripped the edge of the table. What?" Bernard was grinning now. "You did it, Daniel. You're going to Juilliard." The words didn't feel real. Daniel looked at his hands, the same hands that had stacked boxes yesterday, that had taught themselves piano from YouTube videos, that had played at Victoria's dinner party hoping to earn $100. "There's one more thing," Patricia added. "We'd like you to perform at the Young Artist Showcase at Lincoln Center in 3 months. It's a prestigious event and we think you're ready." Daniel thought about his mother working 2 jobs for years, about the broken keyboard he'd practiced on, about being invisible at Victoria's dinner party, about every moment that had led him here. "I need to call my mom," he said, his voice breaking. They let him step into the hallway. Rosa answered on the first ring. "Ma," Daniel said, tears streaming down his face. "I got in. Full scholarship, everything." Rosa's sob came through the phone, loud and joyful and relieved. "I knew it, mijo. I always knew." 3 months later, Daniel stood backstage at Lincoln Center about to perform his first major concert. The showcase featured 12 young musicians, but his segment had generated the most buzz. The story had captured people's imagination. The self-taught prodigy, the warehouse worker turned concert pianist. Rosa sat in the 3rd row, wearing a new dress Daniel had bought her with his stipend money. Bernard sat beside her. Mrs. Chen was there too, and Patricia and dozens of others who'd supported him. There was one empty seat in their row. An invitation had been sent to Victoria Ashford. She hadn't responded. Daniel didn't care anymore. He'd learned an important lesson over the past few months. You can't make people see you if they're determined to look away, but you can make yourself impossible to ignore. When he walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and thunderous. He sat at the piano, adjusted his position, and looked out at the audience. Somewhere in that crowd was a young kid who felt invisible, who had a dream but no clear path. Daniel wanted to play for that kid. He began with his composition, Invisible. But he'd revised the ending. Now it didn't just resolve into hope. It exploded into joy, into certainty, into proof that being seen isn't a gift someone gives you. It's something you claim for yourself. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Critics later called it one of the most moving performances they'd witnessed from a young artist. But for Daniel, the best part was watching his mother cry happy tears, finally able to rest knowing her son's dreams had found solid ground. After the concert, reporters asked him about Victoria, about the dinner party, About being treated as background music. Daniel's answer was simple. I'm grateful for that night. It taught me that my worth isn't determined by who notices me. It's determined by what I do when nobody's watching. I practiced on broken pianos and played my heart out even when no one was listening. That's what made me ready for this moment. Someone asked if he had any message for Victoria. Daniel smiled. I hope she learns to really look at the people around her. You never know who might be extraordinary. That night, as Daniel and Rosa rode the subway home, though soon they'd be moving to nicer housing near Juilliard, Daniel pulled out the letter he'd written the night before his audition. He read it one more time, then tore it into small pieces. He didn't need it anymore. He wasn't invisible. He never had been. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to be heard.